Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Develop a Winning Content Strategy with the Power of Buyer Personas webinar presented by the Funnelholic and sponsored by Kapos, Lead MD, GoToWebinar, Demandbase, and Topo. We are excited to have you join us for the webinar with Tony Zambito. I am Lori Janjigian, VP of Marketing at Cognito, and your moderator today. If you are tweeting or would like to follow the conversation on Twitter, please use the hashtag CMSummit, which is on your screen. We're excited to have some activity going on there already. Like I said, I am your moderator today, Lori Janjigian. I am VP of Marketing at Cognito Interactive. I have been working in the marketing space for quite a while. I'm also working with sales teams on both sides, trying to understand buyers and buyer behavior, getting buyer feedback pre, during, and post-sale, which ultimately leads to content creation across verticals. So I'm really excited for today's webinar to listen to Tony and hear about what works and what we can learn from him. There's a couple housekeeping items for today. Number one, ask questions. You can ask questions at any time. We will answer them following the presentation. Also, with regards to on-demand access, you will receive an email with the details on how to access the on-demand version of the presentation as soon as it's ready. And then as far as the slides go, we will also post the slides on SlideShare and include that information in the on-demand email. Just to let you all know the schedule for today, this is the first of a great day with content marketing. We have an event at 10 about You've Got Buyer Personas Now What, 11, Executing Your Content Strategy, and at 12, 10 Steps to a Unified Content Marketing Process. We would like to thank our sponsors again, Kapos, GoToWebinar, Lead MD, Demandbase, and Topo. And having said that, I would like to get started with the actual presentation. I am really excited to introduce our speaker today, Tony Zambito. He is the creator and today's leading authority on buyer personas. In 2002, Tony established the first ever buyer persona development methodology designed specifically for B2B marketing and sales. This innovation has helped leading companies gain a deeper understanding of their buyers, resulting in improved business, marketing, and sales strategies. And over the past dozen years, Tony has conducted hundreds of buyer interviews and has helped some of today's leading Fortune 100 companies acquire deep buyer insights. So take it away, Tony.
It's fantastic to be here, Lori. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And I'm looking forward to sharing a lot of information today. It'll be a nice, fast-paced presentation for you. A little bit about me, as Lori explained, I created the Buyer Persona Framework back in 2002. I have had experience both in sales and marketing, so hopefully can present both sides of the story here. And so you can find out more about me on my website, which you'll be able to get that address at the end of the presentation. What I am hoping to share today is first a comment about the buyer revolution. We're in the midst of a buyer revolution today. I'd like to also share what is a buyer persona, what the original definition of buyer personas was and why it's important. We're going to cover the 5 main elements of buyer personas and why those are important to have a very standardized best practice point of view. We'll talk about a few important rules, and then we're going to talk about breakthrough content strategy. So let's get started. And when we do get started, I asked everyone who's listening to have a clean slate. Open your mind, remove all the misinformation about buyer personas that exist today. Clean slate thinking in order to fill it with the best practices. Eliminate NTU, which is there's so much making things up about buyer personas in the world right now. And in this particular presentation, we're going to be at a very high level principle point of view versus a in-depth how-to perspective. We're only allotted a certain amount of time, so we have to get through what I think would be very important principles to get breakthrough content strategy. The buyer revolution. What we've heard a lot about in the past year or two is about the new informed and empowered buyer. But you know what? Things have not stood still since then. So let's talk about a couple other things that are going on in this buyer revolution. Number two in this is that buyers are not only are self-directed, but they are creating their own customized path to a purchase. There's been a lot of talk about the buyer's journey, buying processes, buying stage, but you know what? That is actually well in the past. Buyers are now creating their own customized path to purchase, and these are things that we need to find out about. There is what I call a flatter form of collective buying. We have flatter organizations, which means there's more collectiveness in how purchase decisions are being made today. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. It also now means that not only do we need to provide more information to buyers, more insightful information, we also need to have this insight in order to be able to have some expertise in how do we actually develop a content strategy that's going to be relevant to the buyers of the digital age. Right now, to sum it up quickly, right now I think there's an issue around content strategy ineffectiveness. Recent surveys, most recently the CMO Council NetLion survey, I've used as an example in a few articles I've written. Buyers are fed up with poor quality content. And they're putting their hands up and saying, stop, information overload. There's still a heavy product-centric nature to content. And what we're all going to be faced with here is the easy click, drag, and put in the trash can of our content today if we don't figure out how to change content strategy ineffectiveness to being more effective on behalf of buyers. So what is a buyer persona? This is a definition I came up with as far back as 2002. I've only added a couple more things to it since then. It's still very relevant today. And I want to go through this with you real quickly. Buyer personas are research-based, archetypical representation. Those four words are so important for you to understand about what buyer personas are. And I'll explain it as we go further. Who buyers are, what they are trying to accomplish, what goals drive their buying behavior, how they think, how they buy, where they buy, when they decide to buy, and why they buy. And this definition is what gets us the ability to gain deep and profound insight into the story of buyers. And that's basically what buyer personas helps us do, is tell the story of buyers, the who, what, how, where, when, and why of buyers. The purpose of buyer personas is to inform overall buyer strategy. Content strategy is one component of overall buyer strategy. So I asked in the beginning to have a clean slate. There is a misperception that buyer persona was created specifically for content marketing. Please don't limit yourself to that thinking. Buyer personas have applicability in many different areas and can address many different types of problems depending on the organization you're working with and the departments you're working with. So they can be specific to different areas. It is not strictly for content marketing. And this is kind of important in order to gain acceptance of buyer personas with the rest of the organization. The importance of an archetype. Many definitions I've seen out there begin with this is fictional, it's an example of a buyer, it's a profile. I will ask each of you in the audience today to ignore those. The important thing is that an archetype, which has been around for the term archetype and the modeling of archetypes have actually been around for a very long time in the social sciences, but it is depending on being research-based, it describes behavior. And so basically, when you do an archetype, you are modeling a representation of people and their behavior. And the two go together in order to create an archetype. The 5 main elements of buyer persona development. I'm going to go through each one of these today. These 5 elements actually tie back very well to the origins of personas in general. This is a process and a methodology that I created specifically for marketing and sales and for the buyer, but it does borrow heavily from some very smart individuals in the early 90s to late 90s who were foundational or very instrumental in creating the persona movement. So what you're going to go through today is really the essence of what is buyer persona development. What is persona development even in general? So we're going to start out with buyer insight research, and we're going to go through these 5, and we're going to end with how to convert into a buyer strategy, which of course includes the content strategy. So let's begin with buyer insight research. Any good research begins with a problem statement and a hypothesis. This is very important. I've seen many buyer persona development efforts begin without this. And the only way I can explain it is that if you're going on a hiking trip in the Adirondacks and you do not have a compass, you might get lost. And I've seen a lot of buyer persona initiatives get lost because they're not tied to a very specific problem statement or hypothesis. So a problem statement could be related to a design issue. It could be related to the fact there's been a loss of account or customer base. It could be customer retention issue. There are many things that it can be tied to. But the important thing is that your research is going to be only as good as how well you put together a problem statement or hypothesis. The second thing here is that the insight for buyer persona that you're really trying to get at is what's called goal-directed buying behavior. Goals are powerful. They shape behavior, and we're going to look at this a little bit more deeply as we go on. Do not confuse. This is my first rule. I'm going to have a few rules for this presentation. So the first rule is do not confuse sales intelligence with buyer insight. So you see these terms up here, buying criteria, KPI, and there are all kinds of different business jargon terms that are up there. These are factual sales intelligence that actually have been in existence for a very long time. When I was a vice president of sales coming through the ranks in the 90s, for example, we were all dealing with this. And there are many wonderful, actually, sales methodology programs that actually deal with these kind of issues. And the reason why this is important is because content is not getting through to buyers because we're beating them up with business jargon terms. And so, talking about initiatives, we're talking about saving money, we're talking about product solutions all the time. There are buying stages which, they don't even know that they've got these kind of buying stages if you describe to them. It's not getting through. So we have to really say to ourselves, buyer insight gets deeply tied to the goals of people and their behavior. So what is a buyer insight? It's a good question. A buyer insight is contextual in nature. It means it deals with an understanding of the environment that a buyer is in, their situation. It's oftentimes unarticulated, meaning a buyer really struggles to articulate something. What that's on their mind. It could be a struggling in articulating a goal, a perception, an attitude, and often it's not so obvious. Not so obvious in the sense that we would be able to even see it. It becomes a pattern of translating not so obvious into something that can reveal a very deep insight. This last point is extremely important. Buyer insight deals with the gaps in goals. So the aim here of goals is that you want to highlight the gap of how buyers attempt to achieve their goals and then the ideal ways they desire to achieve their goals. So there's a gap in there. They're attempting to achieve them. There's an ideal way that they may think there's a way that they can achieve those goals. So there's a gap there. That's the insight. We need to get in that gap and find out what's going on. The core of buyer personas is goals. You want to focus in on end goals. There are a few other types of goals. For example, there are experience goals. There's life goals. And the idea is not to focus in on tasks. Most research efforts I've seen get into a detailed description of job function, their tasks, what they do, the responsibilities. This is not revealing insight. What you want to focus in on are the gaps that buyers struggle with in achieving their goals. And again, they could be end goals that are business related. They can be end goals that are personal related. They can also be experience type of goals, and they can be life goals. And there's going to be a few examples I'll share with you as we go on. So where do you get this buyer insight? You get this question a lot. Qualitative interviews. This is direct interviews with buyers one-on-one. The best forms of getting this buyer insight is on-site with buyers. And observation is so critical to get the deeper and more profound type of insight that can shape this breakthrough content strategy you're looking for. If you can get willing buyers or willing organizations, a day in the life is fantastic because it opens doors to many different types of things that are going on. It allows you to get creative, allows you to innovate in your own mind, like, wow, this is such a story here, and now how can we help fill the gap in this story that we're uncovering? And I'll just make a brief mention about digital ethnography. This is becoming more important, obviously, because we're in the digital age. But I want to make clear, it does not mean LinkedIn. Okay, most people are thinking, all right, well, we can go to LinkedIn and we can build a buyer persona profile from LinkedIn. This is really not what digital ethnography is. This is how does digital technology, digital media affect behavior today. So you're really trying to dive deep into this behavior, the behavior that's changing buyers today, or I should say that the digital technology is changing buying behavior immensely today. So that's what this is about. There are many forms of digital media and digital technology that's actually changing buying behavior. So another rule I want to talk about. Win-loss interview is not buyer insight research. I hear this often that, oh, well, we did interviews. Well, what were they? Oh, we did win-loss interviews. Well, I've got a few comments about this because I think it's really important. And the first comment is that this is too event contained. I'm not saying they're not important. They help sales tremendously in figuring out how they can win and how they can prevent losing deals. But from a buyer persona perspective and getting the deep insight, there's some issues here. It's too event contained. There are hidden influences that you just cannot get at in win-loss interviews. There's some real research validity issues. One of those, for example, is the fact that, well, let me put it to you in real terms. I've been doing this for a dozen years, and I always say 8 out of 10 times where I've gone and interviewed customers after they've done win-loss interviews. 8 out of 10 will say to the customer directly that they were a close second and everybody did a good job. Well, 8 out of 10, I would find out, really didn't have that on their list. They were fourth, or they said they were terrible. So there's some validity issues there where customers or buyers are actually being protective in what they share about that for lawsuit reasons or whatever they might be. The other side of the coin is someone makes a decision on a high-stake purchase, let's say anywhere from $150,000 to close to $1 million. You know, they cannot afford to look bad when they make that kind of decision. So they're going to be very supportive of the win-loss kind of perspective in promoting the positive outset. And so you really do have trouble getting the deep insight through that type of interviewing. Let me give you an example of that. I worked with FedEx. Through a series of front office win-loss interviews, there really wasn't that revealing. I mean, there was a lot about price, contract, service, quality, you name it. They were always a close second, the nature of the industry. They were a close second. What we really uncovered that the path to purchase existed in the back office. So you see a picture here of a warehouse. It's like a big logistics center. And what we're able to find out by observation and watching people work is that how they handled huge spikes in shipping and batching products that needed to be shipped out made a tremendous difference in the decision that was being made. And so the decision actually came down to a click in the back office, and it had a lot to do that the competitor system handles spikes and batching better than FedEx. And that actually proved to be the reason why they were losing business to their main competitor. And so the win-loss didn't reveal that, but actual on-site observation revealed the real reason. Let's talk about buyer archetypes. They're based on real people. They're not based on job roles. I see this is a very common mistake with buyer personas. Someone will say, hey, we need a buyer persona for the IT director, we need one for the CFO, we need one for the CIO, we need one for whatever job role or function they think is relevant to the situation. Oftentimes, the best buyer persona efforts I've ever seen were role agnostic. It just really didn't have anything to do with the role. It had a lot to do with understanding people and their behavior. So when you do a buyer archetype, you are trying to model an archetypical representation that's really descriptive and is focused on goals. So another rule, do not confuse buyer profile with buyer persona. Slapping a picture on a profile does not make it a buyer persona. I see this over and over and over again. There are many great profiling systems out there. Miller Hyman, I'm showing you as an example. They've been getting into profiling for many, many years. There are many different types of customer profiling systems or methodologies or approaches that have been out there for years. Basically, this is a static snapshot. Putting a picture on a profile doesn't make it a buyer persona. The reason being is that static snapshot that you're looking at has no behavior. There's nothing about the behavior of people, their goals, and the deep insight that you're looking for. So be aware of the fact that there is a big difference between buyer profiling and buyer personas. And I'm not here saying that buyer profiles are not important. They are extremely important. They've been a part of business understanding for many years, but that does not make them buyer personas per se by putting a picture on them. I'll make a comment about something that I'm seeing out there, a trend that you need to be aware of. What I'm calling this flatter collective buying. There's the end of the single buyer concept. And this means you need to really have a collective content strategy, if you will. And let me just talk about this in a brief 15 seconds. Since the 2008 recession, many department heads have to share budgets with others, which means that there's a multi-tiered level of buyer persona perspective that you need. There are more people involved in the decision-making and collaborating and kind of helping each other. And this is really important to understand. And now you've got the digital age, which makes collective buying even more accessible to others, where they can talk globally to others and make these decisions together. Thus, your content must be shareable with others. I've seen this over and over where content is too specific to a very single buyer persona, but it's not relevant or it's not contextual in nature that could be shared with others. Here's a good example of this. In working with HP, we discovered, particularly in the healthcare industry, there are multiple buying teams and many different types of buying team structure that are spread over a region, if you will. So it involves capital budget improvements. It involves many different types of participants, not only from, let's say, IT, but also the medical office department because of healthcare information technology. So they had to develop what I call a multi-tiered content strategy. Their content had to be relevant not only to an IT director, but it had to be relevant to a chief medical officer. It had to be relevant to health information technology partners. And so they really needed to have a multi-tiered content strategy approach that was mapped to distinct buyer personas who had very distinct goals. Another rule, there are no templates. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of very bad buyer persona templates out there. I would say go with the clean slate. Develop your own that is relevant to your situation. Model the description of your buyer persona in the best manner it tells the story of who they are, and in the best way that you can help your organization understand who they are. So buyer personas were not developed in a sense of like a template. That's a profile. What you want to be able to do is get into storytelling with your buyer persona. So what is the best way that you can describe the story of your buyers? Number 3 is buyer scenarios. Scenarios have been used in the design world. They've been used in other types of executive strategy making. These are very important. So the first part of buyer scenarios is that you want a description of what is their current activity-based behavior. And you want to focus in on how they go about accomplishing goals. Once you get a sense of what the goals are, then you really want to look at, well, how do they go about accomplishing these goals? And it's based on good ethnographic research, meaning observation, good questions that are often related to telling them or tell you about how they are trying to accomplish a goal and why that goal is important and what the struggles are in the story. So this is a really important aspect of buyer persona development. And you want to break down the buyer personas into real specific buyer stories. You want to talk about how these stories relate to their interactions. Who are they interacting with? And you want to focus on their current path to purchase. What does that look like, feel like, experience like? Those are the kind of things that you really want to talk about when you build the entire buyer persona perspective and share that with your organization. So here's a rule. Buyer archetypes do not become buyer personas until they're put in action. So if you look at this, I've got one of my favorite persona characters in Hollywood film history, Indiana Jones. And if we only had the picture on the left-hand side of Indiana Jones, we might say, well, okay, it looks like an interesting character, this is who he is, so forth and so on. But we really didn't get to know Indiana Jones until we think about all the action-filled components of that story of Indiana Jones, all the things that he was faced with, from the rolling ball to, getting shot at, whatever it was. But when we think about Indiana Jones, we're thinking about the story of Indiana Jones, all the action. And this is basically what you want to be able to do with buyer personas and your content strategy. You want to be able to recreate the action, the drama in your story to buyers, that it evokes an experience that they are able to see a better future with, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's a good example. I work with a large antivirus and security firm, and they did win-loss interviews that led to a little bit of a change in messaging, and frankly, it just didn't work. So when buyer insight research was conducted out in the field, now this was a large group of small and medium-sized businesses, we actually uncovered 3 very distinct renewal buying scenarios, and we characterized them in this way. There was the 5-minute renewal, the 20-minute renewal, and the 1-hour renewal. And basically, each of those scenarios had a different buyer persona, a very different set of distinct goals that were going on. And so when the inbound activity came in, they were able to identify quickly what kind of scenario was this going to be. And the content and their questions and their ability to help someone was shaped by the fact that they understood what that particular scenario was. They could engage quickly. This was either a 5-minute conversation, it was going to be a 20-minute conversation, or it was going to be a 1-hour type of conversation in support issue. So that was a way of how you tie in your buyer personas, your goals, and your scenarios. Buyer mental models. These are extremely important. In fact, these are probably the secret sauce if you will, of buyer personas. Buyer mental models are perceptions of reality on how things are, how they work, and how we interact. They guide people's thinking and their decision making. There's such a powerful influence. You model mental from the research-based collections of attitudes, beliefs, perceptions, assumptions, experience, and goals. They are often unarticulated and really hard to express. They can be good or they can be bad. Let me give you an example of this quickly. Working with Reed Elsevier, they were faced with their own problem statement and their own hypothesis. Customer retention had dropped significantly. And really, there was no outstanding reason jumping out, like, why did this happen? Well, when the research was conducted, we uncovered a mental model that Reed Elsevier was no longer investing in R&D. And that was a shock because they had actually increased their R&D spending. And the way we found this out is by going back to customers who had actually left 2 years ago. So the immediate win-loss did not reveal this, but by going back further and talking to customers who had actually left a year or two prior to this mental model and discovery, we were able to really uncover something here. What happened was that Reed Elsevier had made several acquisitions and repackaged these acquisition products and services, which led to this new mental model that developed that they weren't really aware of. So the content strategy then began to change to the community to highlight R&D spending, how the acquisition and services actually were contributing to R&D. They were dealing with the scientific community where R&D was really important. So they heard a perfect example of how a mental model formed that could be harmful, and it could be something that you're not even aware of. It's not so obvious. You have to get out there and talk to people about goals, attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions. Let's cover this last one really well, which is the buyer strategy. There are two main elements. One is insight generation, and the second one is how do you turn insight into buyer strategy, and in our case, how do you turn insight into a content strategy? What it takes is a collaborative teamwork to identify the gaps in the goals that are being fulfilled. So here you're looking at the buyer. They've got buyer goals. We've got scenarios, you've got mental models, you've got an archetype, and you've got gaps. So basically, you work in collaborations with the team, and you uncover the key insights and the patterns that are coming out. And this will help you if you focus on this. You really try and, once again, to identify the gaps in the goals that are being fulfilled. Here's a couple approaches that can help with this. When you do that, what you want to do is go through an exercise of creating the ideal buyer scenario. You already have the current one, but how do you create a better one? How do you tell the story of a better path to purchase? So you want to get creative, you want to get innovative, you want to use the insight. You want to use the mental model that might have showed up, like, well, hey, we're not invested in R&D anymore. Where did that come from? And then you want to create a better scenario. You want to tell the story in a better way and create a better experience for your buyers. And you want your content strategy to map to ideal buyer stories. There's going to be multiple stories along the path to a purchase. And this could really help you because your buyer personas are basically characters in a story filled with action and drama. So how do you understand the story of buyers through their path to a purchase? What are they doing? Who are they interacting with? How can you write that out internally so you understand it better? And it's going to then guide you and inform you on what types of content you really need to make that experience happen for them. So content strategy, as a rule, is not just messaging. I've seen this over and over where you look at content strategy as maybe in a limited fashion of just being a messaging exercise. It's not that, but particularly when it's tied to buyer persona. Content innovation is badly needed right now. badly, badly needed. And what you want to be able to do is you want to turn buyer insight into buyer foresight. What I mean by that is buyers need to see a future with you. Your content must show a better future. And it must show that this better future involves a relationship with you. So using a modeling tool, it's really a way to help show a better future. And I'm showing about 4 modeling tools that I've made available on my own website for you to use. And one of those is what I call a buyer persona canvas. This is a canvas of 10 important elements about buyer personas. There are the buyer persona content modeling exercise you can use. There is buyer persona story mapping and buyer persona stories. So I would encourage you to go to my website and begin to look at those as an exercise that you can do. What I hope you take away today, and what I was really happy to share, you have to respond to the buyer revolution that's going on. It's moved beyond the empowered, informed buyer. There are other things going on. That you have the authentic definition and purpose of buyer personas. That you have the powerful 5 main elements of buyer persona development. You know what they are. And if you truly want to master buyer personas, these are the 5 elements that will allow you to do so. The importance of goals and goal-directed buying behavior. This is the core essence of buyer personas. And breakthrough content strategy means showing a better future. So I offer assistance, ways I can help. I've done custom buyer insight research and buyer persona development. Direct hands-on workshops for how to use the buyer persona canvas, the content model, and story mapping. Probably, I would say, in this audience today are quite a few from content marketing agencies and consulting firms. I do offer partnering if you need to help your clients in this particular area. And you can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and my website. And I also offer free 30-minute conversations about issues around buyer insight, buyer personas, customer acquisition, anything. I'm willing to help in any way possible. So that ends it for me, Lori. It was a great, fast-paced presentation, so I hope people got some value out of it. And if there are any questions with the few minutes we have left, I'm happy to answer them.
There are. Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it. I have tons of notes that I'm really excited about. So let me try to put some order to these questions here. And again, for that, if you have any more questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next couple minutes. Tony, the first question is just kind of starting from the basics. Who should be getting this buyer insight, if it's sales versus marketing? And if it is marketing, what are recommendations for working with sales on putting buyer personas together?
The who is a really important question. And let me go back to tying it to the problem statement and the hypothesis. That helps inform, who should get involved. What is the issue that's going on that needs to be uncovered? So then the second part of that equation is, how do you get the most revealing interviews and the most revealing insights? Sometimes it takes people that can be part of the organization. If I use Intel as an example, they've created their own ethnography and research department. So these people are seen as objective, and customers are very willing to allow very in-depth types of conversations. Sometimes, sales and marketing can be very problematic because customers put up a defensive wall to both. So people who do the interviewing can come from different departments, maybe corporate strategy even. So there's a lot of options there. So in terms of the second half of that question, getting the support of sales when marketing does it, I think the biggest thing that can happen there is that if you show a buyer profile with a picture on it, you're not going to get the support of sales because they're going to look at it and say, well, wait a minute. I mean, I've been doing Miller Hyman for a while. I've been doing customer-centric selling. We've been asked by our own VP of sales to do this. I don't see anything different. In fact, I'll use a quote from a VP of sales that I interviewed recently. He basically said, look, if marketing comes to me and shows me a buyer persona and starts talking about initiatives, that's nothing new for me. I expect my sales team to know this, and we review this in our pipeline review. So the best way that you can really get the support of sales is to really zero in on the goals and those deep insights, things that really help them understand buyers better. Once you, and you oftentimes that means getting outside of the business jargon and the sales intelligence.
All right. So follow up to that, a question came in. How do you suggest we build personas for C-level people? We are a startup and won't get any of our targets to give us insights. Any suggestions?
On how to get C-level?
Mm-hmm.
How to get C-level personas, I guess is what the question is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's carry it to this level. I'm going to keep going back to goals. Goals are really, really important. So, C-level may have very different, distinct goals than, let's say, a middle management level. So, in order to gain the interview, you have to begin to get at least some hypothesis about what those goals are and relate it back to the executive or the C-level of why it's important to gain this information. And I'll be frank with everyone here. Oftentimes, it takes a third party to get that access because executives really have a low tolerance when it comes into what looks, feels, and smells like a vendor. So, unfortunately, it's just something you have to deal with. It's not true in all cases, but oftentimes you have to really kind of tie it back to very specific goals. And if you can get that insight, you can get the interview. And when I talked about the multi-tiered approach, this is what you're looking for. You are looking for, like HP was able to discover, to have a whole what they call dossier of the content Their content strategy included content specific to executives as well as IT directors because we talked about very specific goals for each.
Sounds good. Do buyer personas work when marketing to SMBs? Are there instances when buyer personas aren't as useful?
Well, the SMB is great. It's a great question. What you're trying to do at the SMB level is you've got this mass. You might have a mass of 10, 15, 20,000 customer accounts in a database. And buyer personas are great, totally great, for bringing down or cutting through the complexity and getting down to the simplicity of the story about buyers. The example that I gave with the antivirus and security firm is a perfect example. They had 20,000, 40,000, I forgot how many, but it was in that kind of a range of customers. And by doing interviews in certain segments, we were able to get down to the simplicity of understanding the 5-minute, 20-minute, and 1-hour type of scenario. So buyer personas are well suited. In fact, best suited in many ways for SMB understanding. Now, to answer the other question, like when are they not useful? Here's a good example. I worked with one of a very large toy manufacturer, and frankly, I recommended that they didn't need to go into an in-depth exercise because basically their customers, or their customers, I should say, were people like Target and Walmart. And, they go to the toy show, and they're cutting their big deals at the toy show. So they didn't really need that high level of in-depth exercise, if you will, into buyer personas because it was a very confined industry. The rules were pretty much set. The way things happened every year, everybody knew each other. So in those kind of situations, it's not exactly an ideal situation.
Sounds good, and I'm going to try to squeeze in one last question here,
All right.
which I think is a good way to close it out. How often should you revisit or update the buyer personas?
Well, that's a great question. I believe that right now, buyer behavior is changing so fast that I wouldn't even put a time limit on it. I'd find a way to think of it not in terms of like how often, but I would think of it in terms of how well can you monitor the changes in buying behavior, and then how can you continuously update, evolve your buyer personas as these changes are occurring. Because you just never know when there's an introduction of a new technology that's going to change everything. So it could be next month. Next month, we'll all be sitting here going, oh, my God, where did that come from? Some new technology that could change everything. So I would change it from, like, updating to how well can we monitor buying behavior and how it affects the buyer personas we have.
Sounds good. I feel like it always ties back to the communication between sales and marketing, too. So there are a couple other questions that we don't have time for. I do want to end things, but the follow-up questions are regards to getting your message out once you've actually put the buyer personas together, and I think that is a good segue into the rest of the schedule for today's summit. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. On behalf of me and Tony and Funnelholic Project, we have other events coming up, so please make sure to sign up for those if you have not done that already. And I do want to thank the sponsors again, but most of all, Tony, I'm really excited about this, so thank you again for sharing your insights.
Thank you so much. It was a great opportunity to share with everyone. I really appreciate it.
Sounds good. Take care, everyone.